The first thing Warren Tiller noticed was the smell. Not that it was bad, just surprising. A strange mix of ozone, wet mulch, and something like burnt cinnamon filled the air inside the containment dome. He stepped through the decontamination arch and blinked at the sudden shift in temperature. Cool and dry outside, now hot and sticky like a rainforest sauna. A small blue creature with 6 eyes and a thick, turtle-like neck waddled toward him holding a clipboard-shaped device. "Warren Tiller," it asked, its voice high and scratchy. "That's me," Warren replied, adjusting the strap on his backpack. "You must be my handler." "I am called Feller. I am the Agri-Assessment Coordinator for Sector 6. You are the only human applicant to join this year's Intergalactic Cultivation Trials." "Guess that makes me a bit of a wild card," Warren said, offering a polite smile. Feller blinked all 6 eyes in sequence. "Wild cards are not desirable in controlled trials." Warren opened his mouth to reply, then thought better of it. He followed Feller across the dome's tiled floor toward a set of transparent partitions. Beyond them, several alien participants were already at work in their assigned growth zones. Each zone was about the size of a tennis court, with soil beds and hydration lines installed. Feller stopped at the last plot, where a plastic crate of basic tools sat on a bench. "This is your designated area. You may not exceed the 20 by 20 meter boundary. You have 2 standard planetary days. Your goal, cultivate a crop ecosystem appropriate to your native ecology." 2 days to grow something, Warren asked. "That's barely enough time to sprout basil." "You were provided parameters in the orientation packet," Feller said. "Artificial growth stimulants are permitted but monitored. You may access the synthesis lab once per 10 hours if needed." Warren dropped his backpack and knelt by the soil. He ran his fingers through it, lifting a handful to his nose. "This isn't Earth soil. It is a balanced blend designed to mimic the nutrient profile of various planetary topsoils," Feller said. "Each participant receives identical substrate. Fairness is essential." Warren nodded and stood. "All right. So just to be clear, the others are growing crops from their home planets." "Correct. You must do the same." Feller turned and waddled off, leaving Warren to inspect his neighbors. To his left, a tall insectoid being named Vetra was already manipulating a set of glowing stalks with 4 arms. The stalks shimmered in iridescent colors, swaying slightly as though responding to Vetra's movements. To his right, a squat, moss-covered amphibian was planting tiny pods that emitted a faint, rhythmic hum. Warren rubbed the back of his neck and sighed. "Okay, Earth. Let's see what you've got." He unzipped his backpack and pulled out a sealed container the size of a lunchbox. Inside were dozens of labeled vials, each containing seeds or spores. Oak, pine, birch, wild grasses, mycorrhizal fungi, native mosses. He had prepared a full temperate biome starter kit. He didn't intend to grow crops. He was going to grow a forest. By hour 3, his plot was a muddy mess. Warren had layered the soil with composted biomass he'd synthesized in the lab using leftover alien plant waste. He spent hours mixing in fungus spores, adjusting acidity levels, and setting up a humidity dome to trap moisture. He wasn't sure what the others thought, but he could feel Vetra's glances from time to time. The first sprout came just before the 4th hour, an acorn he'd pre-treated to simulate winter dormancy. A tiny green loop broke the soil and reached upward. Warren grinned. "There you are." The second day began with a surprise visit from Feller. "You have requested the synthesis lab 6 times, Feller said, glancing down at the new growth in Warren's plot. "You are exceeding average usage." "I'm not cheating," Warren said. "Everything's within the rules. I'm just pushing the limits." Feller blinked. "Biomass density in your zone has increased by 200%. Explain." "I'm simulating a forest succession cycle. Fast growers, first maples, birches, then I'll introduce shade-tolerant species. I've layered the soil with fungal networks to increase nutrient uptake. Your soil temperature is elevated beyond safe thresholds for Earth flora. That's intentional. I'm using geothermal loops to accelerate root development." Feller peered at him. "You are attempting to grow a forest in 2 days. "That's the idea," Warren said, wiping his brow. Why? What's everyone else growing? The mossy amphibian next door was cultivating a crop of translucent orbs the size of grapes. Vetra's stalks now reached head height and emitted a low thrum. Other zones showed neat rows of colorful vegetation, none taller than a meter. Feller didn't answer the question. Continue under observation. By hour 28, Warren's zone was impassable without a machete. Saplings stood shoulder high. A dense carpet of moss covered the ground. Vines stretched between young trees. Earth bugs fluttered among the leaves, bred from larvae he'd smuggled in nutrient gels. He was exhausted. His arms ached and his shirt clung to him with sweat. But he was winning. Or at least, he thought so until the incident with the irrigation manifold. He had just finished reinforcing a tree support post when one of the underground hydration lines burst. Water erupted from the soil like a geyser, soaking the roots and knocking over several young trees. "Damn it," Warren shouted, scrambling to shut off the valve. Vetra approached the boundary, 4 eyes blinking in concern. "Your water containment has failed." "No kidding," Warren grunted, twisting the control unit. "Can I borrow a sealant patch?" Vetra extended a long, jointed arm, handing over a roll of self-setting bio patch. "Why grow such complexity?" "Crops are sufficient." "Because forests are ecosystems," Warren replied, sealing the pipe. "They feed themselves, they adapt, crops are short-term." Vetra tilted its head. "You seek permanence in a temporary trial. I seek proof of concept." By the final hour, Warren's zone resembled a miniature woodland. Not a jungle, not a crop bed, a self-sustaining forest microcosm. He had even introduced small pollinators and earthworms, transported in stasis and revived in the soil. When the final bell sounded, the dome lights dimmed and a soft chime echoed throughout the arena. Participants stepped away from their zones. Feller arrived with 3 other blue-skinned evaluators, each carrying analysis devices. The alien judges inspected each zone in turn. Vetra's stalks received murmurs of approval. The grape orbs earned nods, but when they reached Warren's zone, they stopped. One judge stepped forward and disappeared behind a curtain of leaves. Another followed, scanning the air. After 10 minutes, Feller emerged from the undergrowth, brushing a leaf off his shoulder. "Assessment complete, so?" Warren asked, his voice hoarse. Feller paused. "Your biomass output exceeds all previous records. Biodiversity index is 99 species. Pollination cycle is active. Soil regeneration processes have initiated." Warren looked around, panting. "Is that good? You have overachieved." Dramatically. The other participants gathered, watching with curiosity. "But," Feller added, "this trial was for crop cultivation. You grew a biome." Warren's heart sank. "So I failed." Feller looked at him, then at the young forest behind him. "You did not follow the standard model. But you demonstrated a viable growth system adaptable for long-term off-world colonization." One evaluator spoke up. "His zone is producing oxygen at a rate triple that of any other. It is self-sustaining." Another added, "He used alien waste materials to build biomass." "That level of adaptability is unexpected." Feller folded his hands. "You did not win the crop yield trial, but we are initiating a new classification, terraformative potential. You are its first benchmark." Warren sat down heavily on the bench, letting out a long breath. From the edge of his vision, Vetra approached. "Your method is inefficient for food production, but elegant." "Thanks," Warren said. "It wasn't about food." Vetra tilted its head. "Then what?" Warren looked back at the tiny forest swaying in the artificial breeze. "It was about what comes after food. Shelter, shade, balance." Feller nodded once. "You will be invited to advise in the upcoming planetary restoration initiatives." Warren blinked. "Wait, seriously, you have proven capable of rapid ecosystem deployment." "That is valuable." Warren leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. "Well, guess I better get some rest." "You will require it," Feller said. "The next trial is in 40 hours. Warren groaned. "There's more." This was merely phase 1. Warren hadn't expected to be woken by a lizard wearing goggles. The creature tapped insistently at the side of his bunk, claws clicking against the metal. It stood barely waist-high and had a hunched posture, like it had been carrying secrets for a long time. Its goggles were too large, magnifying its elliptical pupils to an unsettling degree. "Human Warren," it rasped. "You are late," Warren groaned and sat up too fast, banging his head on the bunk's upper frame. "Late for what?" The lizard rummaged in a pouch slung across its chest and pulled out a tightly rolled scroll. "Phase 2 orientation. Attendance is compulsory." "You were scheduled 6 segments ago." "I wasn't told when it started. That is not our responsibility." Warren blinked at the scroll. "Is that paper, plant pulp substrate, waterproof, flame-resistant, edible in emergencies?" He swung his legs over the side of the bunk and rubbed his face. "Of course it is." Minutes later, he was hustled across a narrow causeway suspended over a glowing lake. The facility's outer dome was visible in the distance, refracting daylight in a way that made it look like a suspended drop of oil. The lizard who finally introduced himself as Brilt walked with a springy gait and stopped often to sniff the air. "Right," Warren muttered between breaths. "So what's phase 2? More farming?" "Not farming," Brilt said. "Application. We test your system's resilience under fluctuating conditions, like weather, among other variables." They reached a wide platform at the end of the causeway. It loomed over an open crater where a second dome was being assembled. Giant scaffolds surrounded the area, and dozens of aliens in various protective suits moved in coordinated lines. Warren spotted a few familiar faces, participants from the cultivation trial strapped into harnesses, while technicians adjusted equipment around them. Brilt handed him a slim jumpsuit. "Put this on, your forest is being relocated." Warren stared at him. "Relocated? That thing weighs a couple tons. We extracted the entire plot in a single lift. Soil matrix was preserved." He struggled into the jumpsuit, which clung too tightly in all the wrong places. "You moved a forest just to test it, correct? You will now demonstrate its viability under accelerated planetary conditions." Below them, Warren's forest now sat inside a massive rotating platform. Huge lamps ringed the ceiling, some glowing red, others violet. The floor beneath the biome was split into triangular panels, each capable of independent movement. It looked like someone had built a rotating stage for a very ambitious school play. "What exactly is going to happen down there?" Brilt handed him a helmet. "You will find out." The platform lowered them into the test chamber. As they descended, the temperature shifted subtly cooler, then warmer, then dry. Humidity gauges blinked along the walls. Once they reached the bottom, a door hissed open, and Warren stepped into his forest again, though now it felt like stepping into a memory someone had tried to translate. The undergrowth had survived the transfer, but some of the saplings leaned awkwardly from the shift. A few leaves bore pale spots from sudden light exposure. He knelt by a mossy patch and found it damp but disturbed, as if something had scraped through. "Are the bugs still in here?" 70% of your biota survived transit," Brilt said over the comm. "We replenished some insect populations." "There are also new species." Warren's shoulders tensed. "What kind of new species?" "Unannounced. Observe and adapt." The lights above changed suddenly red to blue, and a low hum began to vibrate through the floor. Warren looked up. The lamps weren't just for show. They were shifting the wavelengths in cycles, simulating alien suns. He glanced at his hands. The skin had gone slightly bluish under the hue change. The ground beneath him tilted. He stumbled, catching himself against a birch trunk as the platform swiveled. Soil shifted underfoot. A small cluster of ferns collapsed sideways, roots exposed. "Great," he muttered. "Tilted gravity and light swings. What's next? Acid fog?" "Segment 3 includes chemical precipitation," Brilt confirmed. "Of course it does." He spent the next several hours moving through the biome, reinforcing root structures and anchoring saplings with flexible mesh. Lichen patches began to bleach under the blue spectrum, so he applied a nutrient spray synthesized from the alien waste stockpile. The pollinators buzzed erratically, thrown off by the temperature shifts, and one of them stung him on the ear. By the time the lights shifted to ultraviolet, Warren had built a small trench around the central tree cluster. He was applying a fungal culture to the exposed roots when something rustled nearby. He turned, expecting another technician. Instead, a creature the size of a large dog stepped from behind a fallen branch. Its body shimmered like wet glass, reflecting distorted fragments of the forest around it. It had no discernible eyes, but its head tilted toward him with unmistakable intent. "Brilt," Warren said quietly. "Did you introduce predators?" "No, that is unintentional." The creature took a step forward. Its limbs moved fluidly, too many joints bending in directions Warren didn't like. He backed up slowly, keeping the central tree between them. "Advise me here. Remain calm. Do not display weakness. Great advice unless you consider sweating and shaking signs of strength." The creature sniffed at the air, then lunged. Warren grabbed a fallen branch and swung, catching it mid-leap. The branch cracked, sending a burst of spores into the air. The creature recoiled, hacking and twisting, then bolted into the shadows. Brilt's voice returned to the calm. "Your fungal defenses are effective." "Noted. You didn't know that would work." "No, that was improvisational." Warren wiped the sweat from his face. "I'm going to need a full list of everything loose in this dome. That data is currently incomplete. I hate you." "Understood." Later, during the third cycle of light variation, he discovered that the soil's microbial layer had begun to mutate, not die-mutate. The combination of alien light and fluctuating nutrients had triggered a lateral gene transfer event. Bacteria from the alien compost had fused with the Earth microbes. He scraped a sample into a vial and held it up. "Brilt, I think your waste products are rewriting my soil." "Interesting." "Is the forest dying?" "No, it's adapting, faster than I expected." Then the test continues. By the time the fourth cycle rolled in, Warren had stopped trying to fix things and started cataloging them. Vines that had originally grown in spirals now grew in interlocking hexes. A beetle he didn't recognize burrowed into a sapling and came out covered in bioluminescent spores. The forest wasn't just surviving the alien conditions, it was eating them. He lay down on a bed of moss near the central cluster, helmet off, just breathing. "You still alive?" Brilt asked. "Define alive." "You remain functional. That is sufficient. I need water and food, and a medtech who can explain why my hand's turning blue." Color shift is a known side effect of prolonged UV exposure. Circulation will normalize. Hydration units are en route. A small drone zipped overhead and dropped a box beside him. He opened it to find a metal pouch of nutrient slurry and a bottle labeled Reclaimed H2O, 94% purity. He took a sip. "They're going to want to use this, aren't they?" he said aloud. "The forest?" "No," Warren muttered, biting into the tasteless nutrition bar. "The process, the way it adapts, they're going to want to copy it." Brilt said nothing for a moment, then, it was already requested by 4 planetary colonization committees. Warren sat up. "I haven't finished testing it. They have seen enough." He looked around at the warped but thriving biome. "It's not ready, it may never be ready, but it works." Warren leaned back again, staring at the canopy where leaves now shimmered with purples and silvers. "I built a forest," he said. "And now it's building itself." Brilt responded with a low clicking sound that might have been approval. "You have passed phase 2, Warren frowned. "There's a phase 3, isn't there?" "Correct, begins in 2 standard days." "Do I get a bed this time?" "Unlikely." He closed his eyes. "I hate this job." "Then you are doing it correctly." Warren's nose bled for the second time that morning. Not a dramatic gush, just a slow, steady leak that dripped onto his collar as he crouched beneath the twisted canopy, elbows resting on one knee. "I'm telling you, this forest is starting to breathe differently," he said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I can taste it. Feels like high altitude, but we're underground." A narrow, serpentine creature with pale, translucent scales slithered down from the upper branches beside him. Its torso inflated slightly as it exhaled an imitation of human breathing it had adopted after watching Warren for several hours. "You are correct," it said. "Oxygen output has increased by 47% since nightfall. Pressure has shifted." "You were not built for this." "Neither was this place," Warren muttered, wiping his face on his sleeve. "What's your designation again?" "Tharn. I was assigned to observe the biome's internal evolution. You are leaking from the face. Is this normal?" "No." "But it's manageable." Tharn coiled its lower body around a moss-covered root and blinked its 4 lidless eyes. "You refused reoxygenation therapy. Because I need to see what it does to someone like me. If this works for humans, it'll work better for species with higher tolerance thresholds. If it doesn't work, better I find out now than some poor colonist halfway through a terraformation cycle. Your logic is recognized. Your methodology is inefficient. Welcome to humanity, Tharn. The forest had changed again. Not by design, but through its own inertia. The vines now rewove themselves every few hours, forming dense overhangs that redirected light. The mycelium Warren had introduced during Phase 1 had hybridized into thread-like tendrils that pulsed gently under the surface, responding to movement. The soil had warmed further, though no external heat was being added. Something was happening at the microbial level, but the lab scanners couldn't read it clearly. Warren stood slowly, balancing against a warped birch that now had metallic-looking streaks in its bark. Do we have a final test scenario yet? You will be presented with it shortly. The director arrives soon. I thought Feller was in charge. Feller oversees. The director judges. Warren didn't like the sound of that. He'd recovered from the earlier trials with only minor symptoms: skin irritation, disrupted sleep, and now the nosebleeds, but those were manageable. What he couldn't manage was the sense that the forest had begun interpreting its own purpose. It was no longer just growing, it was reacting. By late afternoon, the lights in the dome dimmed to simulate dusk. Artificial insects settled into quiet hums. Even the vines relaxed, loosening their grip around the upper branches. Warren leaned against a tree trunk, watching the canopy settle. Then the ground shook. Only slightly at first, like a distant tremor. Tharn's body stiffened beside him. That is not part of the environmental programming, it said. Can you find out what's causing it? Tharn darted off toward the southern edge of the biome, disappearing into the underbrush with unsettling silence. Warren jogged toward the central clearing. The shaking continued, a low, persistent rumble that vibrated through his boots. When he reached the clearing, he saw a dozen maintenance drones hovering above the forest, releasing broad-spectrum mist in slow spirals. "What is that?" he shouted toward the canopy. A voice crackled through the speakers mounted on the rim of the dome. It was deeper than Feller's, colder, with clipped consonants. "Final scenario, ecological incursion." Warren's stomach dropped. "You're introducing an invasive species, incorrect." "We are awakening one." From the forest edge, a groaning sound echoed low and wet, as if the trees themselves were shifting. Then something moved between the trunks, not fast, not aggressive, just wrong. A shape emerged as tall as the canopy itself. Its surface shimmered in the dim light, not unlike the predator from Phase 2, but slower and anchored. It had no limbs. It moved by expanding and contracting its lower half, dragging itself in slow pulses. Wherever it passed, the undergrowth browned and crumbled. Warren grabbed the nearest branch and snapped it free. The tip oozed sap that smelled like citrus and vinegar. He dipped it into the soil, coating it with fungal residue, then raised it like a makeshift spear. "You dropped a biophage into the ecosystem," he said to the sky. "That's not a test. That's sabotage. The organism is naturally occurring in several colonized worlds. If your forest cannot resist it, it is not viable." Warren backed away as the creature advanced. It didn't lunge. It absorbed. Everything it touched withered, its surface secreting a clear gel that hissed on contact with living matter. He flanked right, darting back into the denser growth. The hybrid mycelium lit up under his feet, responding with a faint tremor. He paused. The forest was aware. It had already identified the threat. A new growth had begun near the eastern quadrant, thick, fibrous stalks that hadn't been there the night before. They grew in tight clusters, like barricades. Warren moved toward them, brushing his fingers along their sides. Slick, warm, and faintly bioluminescent. Behind him, the biophage let out a sound like wind through a broken flute. He knelt beside the barricade stalks and dug into the soil. The roots were fused with the fungal network. The forest had responded to the intruder by building a wall. "Not in days, but in hours. Come on," he muttered. "Show me something else." The canopy above the stalks began to shift. Leaves twisted into overlapping layers, forming a kind of funnel. Water condensed along their edges, then dripped downward in steady streams. The roots below absorbed it instantly. The forest wasn't just reacting. It was coordinating. Warren stood and ran back toward the clearing, where the biophage was now halfway through a moss field. He circled wide, then doubled back toward the fungal barricade. The creature followed his movement, drawn by the vibrations. As it neared the barricade, the roots below pulsed. A fine mist lifted from the soil, spore-laden, dense, and sweet-smelling. The biophage hesitated, then it recoiled, not violently, but as if repelled. Its surface rippled, and it began to retreat. Warren dropped to one knee, panting. The voice returned. Containment successful, scenario complete. He didn't respond. His hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the sudden drop in adrenaline. The forest had protected itself, not with fire, not with violence, with chemistry. Tharn reappeared beside him, noiseless as before. You survived. Barely. And your forest has exceeded expectations. Warren stood slowly. It's not a forest anymore, it's a habitat intelligence. Tharn tilted its head. You refer to it as sentient. No, Warren said, but close enough to matter. Later that cycle, he was escorted to the debriefing chamber, an oblong room with no visible walls, only slowly shifting colors. Feller stood near a long table, flanked by the director, a tall figure whose skin looked like polished basalt. The director spoke first. Your ecosystem adapted to artificial light, gravity fluctuation, invasive species, and microbial instability. Warren nodded. And I lost 15% biomass, a third of my original pollinators, and my blood pressure isn't what it used to be. You succeeded, the director said. I didn't ask to be right, I asked to be safe. Feller stepped forward. Your biome has been approved for deployment in low-oxygen, high-variance colonies. You will oversee initial installations on 3 worlds. Warren looked at them both. Is there an option where I go back to Earth and sleep for a week first? No, said the director. I figured. Tharn slithered into the chamber, carrying a sealed container. Your forest has produced a new compound. The medical team believes it may be responsible for your improved cellular regeneration. Warren opened the container. Inside was a pale, viscous liquid, faintly fragrant. Let me guess, tastes like moss and regret, pine and citrus, Tharn corrected. Warren leaned back in his chair and laughed. Not from amusement, just relief. He had built a forest. The forest had built something back, and now it was ready.